I'm Representative Kristen Robbins. I'm Chair of the House Fraud Prevention and State Agency Oversight Committee, here with some of my colleagues who serve on the committee or just care about this issue. And just wanted to talk quickly. Today in the Fraud Committee, we had the governor's fraud package presented. And you know, it was a good overview. We had multiple commissioners there, appreciated the testimony and the oversight of what the governor's trying to do. But our concern throughout the hearing is that there's a lot of new money being spent, but probably not a lot of great culture change that is needed to really attack the root of the fraud. And so my concern is that taxpayers think this is the big solve, and just for various reasons in the package, I'm not sure that's going to bear out. And what we really need to do is focus on eligibility criteria, on identifying places where there's been spikes. And I know they do plan to do some analytics on that, but when you drill down in the hearing about the data analytics, programs are already being set up for electronic record keeping, for childcare, for different ways of tracking things. And these programs are already being invested in and built in rather than being a cohesive enterprise-wide strategy. So I have a lot of concern about the money we're putting into these different programs piecemeal rather than looking at an overall strategy on the IT. And layering data analytics on top of that, I think will help, but I don't know if it'll help if it's not done as a whole enterprise-wide function for the government. So I actually came away with greater concerns about the IT piece than we had before. But we are here today to talk about one way we are trying to help Minnesotans, and that is by launching our new long-promised whistleblower portal. So people can now go to mnfraud.com, and there's a secure portal set up where you can enter your name and your address and the basics of what you want to identify as fraud. Our staff will take a look at it, and then we will reach out to you to get more detail. We will forward it to the Office of Legislative Auditor or to the BCA or other law enforcement officials if necessary. But we want Minnesotans to know there is a new portal that will give you the opportunity to report anything you've seen, whether you're an agency worker who's working so hard and sees things that they've been trying to flag and it's fallen on deaf ears, or whether you're a person who's receiving services, or whether you're a person who is providing services and has seen anomalies. As everyone knows, I've been meeting constantly with whistleblowers from all of those different walks of life, and so this will be a way we can centralize and hopefully triage some of the information coming in and make it easier for us as a team to follow up and also get it to the right people. So I want to be very clear, we as legislators cannot receive anything protected under Chapter 13, so very specific detail that's protected by HIPAA or individual names or individual health records or anything like that, you cannot share with us. You just share with us the basic idea. We can do some follow-up. We can get you to the right reference point if it's protected data. The OLA can receive that. The BCA can receive that. Law enforcement can receive that. The Attorney General can receive that. So we hope that this is a hub where people report and we can get it out to the right places so people can have their concerns followed up on more appropriately. So we're excited about that. We are excited about some aspects of the governor's fraud package. I think there's some good things in there on the making a state crime for kickbacks and theft of public funds. But again, we have some concerns there, so I'll let my colleagues talk about that. Overall, our concern is that there isn't enough done to have agency staff held accountable. There's a lot of new money, there's a lot of new staff, but there's still, as the OLA has talked about and I've talked about repeatedly, no requirement for grants management staff to take this training provided by the Office of Grants Management. That should be a job description. That should be required. If you're administering a grant, you have to go through the training and get certified. I have a bill coming out of all the things we've heard in committee thus far through the OLA, the Office of Grants Management, DHS, when they've all presented. We've been taking notes, we've been identifying things they've identified as problems in statute, and that bill, I'm told I'll get the jackets today and can drop it today. So those are going to be ways that we try to address the gaps that we think the governor's bill is still missing. And we really need to have that accountability, not only for the people providing services, but for the people administering the programs. And that's what we hope to get out of this. Thank you. I'll turn it over to my colleagues, Vice Chair Anderson.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. It was a very good hearing, I think. There are some good things in the governor's proposal, but there are many, many things that are missing. The majority of the dollars that go into this, into the proposal, are really just adding staff into agencies that didn't catch the fraud in the first place, or frankly caught it and didn't do anything about it. And that's the biggest problem we've seen in state government. We have in House File 1, which is going to be the OIG bill. We're working very hard with the Senate on a bipartisan basis to make sure that we do this right, by creating a statewide OIG. Because frankly, it's once the fraud is found, what do you do about it? You've got to have a system where state employees feel comfortable reporting that it's going to go somewhere, that it's going to ultimately go to an entity, whether that's the OIG or the BCA or the Attorney General's office or county attorneys, but it's actually going to get prosecuted, and we're going to see change. We have a culture problem in state government. We have a culture problem that we just let it happen. We let fraud happen. People don't want to, cause too many problems, and that's costing us billions of dollars in state. And we have dollars that are not going to the folks that they need to go to, and they're not serving those. So the governor's fraud package, there are chunks of it which make sense, and there are parts that are just blatantly missing, and that's the OIG, that's the changing the culture, that's the responsibility of employees, state employees, commissioners, to actually do something about it. And we need to have all of these parts if we're going to make a change in Minnesota. Thank you.
Hi, I'm State Representative Marion Rarick, formerly O'Neill. I want to talk about the BCA portion of this program, or the proposal, I mean. So if you want to know if the governor's taking fraud seriously, all you have to do is look at the changes for the criminal penalties. And he's only increasing the criminal penalties by 20% for the top 3 highest theft categories. That's a drop in the bucket. And as the commissioner spoke, and actually the superintendent of the BCA, that is far below what the federal penalties are. So there's already a huge, huge gap. Here in Minnesota, we don't really take crime terribly seriously. Why do I say that? Because our criminal penalties are far below most of the federal standards. And then if you actually do get charged with something, we plead down. But 90 to 95% of the cases are pled down. Then after you plead down to a lower charge, then your sentencing, at least 25 to 30% of those are downward departures on top of that. Then if you actually get sent to prison, you have huge good time. So we just had a change in law the last 2 years where you only have to serve 50% of your prison time. That is far below the federal standard. So now this proposal, if you want to know if the governor is taking fraud seriously, all you have to do is look at what he's doing with the penalties. He's increasing the top 3 highest theft categories by just 20%. That is a drop in the bucket. You want to know how else I know he's not serious? Is the fact that he has included one new forensic auditor in the BCA, one. There's 151 new FTEs in DHS and one forensic auditor at the BCA. This isn't a serious proposal. I wish he was serious.
So just to wrap up, we are thrilled to announce the new whistleblower portal. We would encourage Minnesotans to go to mnfraud.com to share with us any credible allegations of fraud that they want to get to our attention, and then we can help either get back to them or forward it on to the Office of Legislative Auditor. I should also point out that the Office of Legislative Auditor already has a very robust whistleblower portal. It's called Report Wrongdoing on the Office of Legislative Auditor website, and there you can even upload documents to the OLA. So that's another avenue that already exists, but I think Minnesotans aren't as well aware of. And my understanding is the BCA may be working on something as well. So we want to change the culture by encouraging people to share with us what they see going on and help us change it. The people we talk to in the agencies, people we talk to in getting the services, they want Minnesota to have clean government. And as was pointed out, this is rare. Andy Luger said Minnesota has a fraud problem he hasn't seen in any other state. So this is not just we need more IT. This is not happening in other states, and that's why we need a culture change. Thank you.
Why require that folks put in contact info and their first and last name as part of this space?
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
Yeah, on the website, it requires that folks put in first and last name, phone number, and email. I'm just wondering why not have an option for anonymous reporting too?
You know, it is a secure website, so I just want to make sure people understand we've embedded security, so it's like a secure payment process system. So it is secure, but we need a way to follow up with people. Getting anonymous allegations, there's just then nothing I can do about it. So I need to be able to follow up with people or our staff.
Can you talk about, you mentioned that there's not penalties for state employees in the governor's proposal. Why is that important, especially since we don't know of any state employees who, like, these are outside organizations doing the fraudulent activity that we know of, so why the need to penalize state employees?
Yeah, I would say the characterization of penalized state employees isn't really what we're after. What we're after is accountability for people who manage these programs. So if someone manages a program that is not, and there's enormous fraud and that hasn't been recognized by the grants manager, then there should be some sanction for that. Now, the commissioner testified that they would investigate and they would see, but the commissioner very clearly stopped short of saying that anyone would be fired for allowing huge amounts of fraud under their watch. And I think Minnesotans are looking for that level of accountability. In Feeding Our Future, $250 million, no one was fired. In the overpayments for CCAP, no one's been fired. In fact, people have been moving around in different positions at DHS for years, since 2019. And so the same people are moving into different positions, but the outcomes continue to be, we see a lot of fraud. So at some point, if you were in the private sector and there was a huge mistake on your part, even if it wasn't intentional, even if it wasn't criminal, you would still probably be demoted or fired or let go or something, right? And so the unwillingness to entertain that, yes, at some point there might be a level of fraud that requires someone to lose their job, that doesn't seem to be part of the conversation. And it hasn't been since 2019 or earlier. So I think that will be part of the culture change when people realize they can be rewarded for fantastic work, and they also could face sanction if they are not doing their job. But part of that is also helping employees be prepared to do their job. So one of the things in my new bill that's coming out is requiring them to go through this grants management training. So right now it's advised, people are encouraged, hope you do it, but it's not required. And if you have responsibility for hundreds of millions of dollars, you really need to know how to do risk assessment. You need to know how to recognize fraud. You need to know how to do closeout reports. And if those things aren't required or we're not providing the training for our employees, then we are missing the boat as a state government, because that's the minimal fiduciary responsibility taxpayers expect, that the people running these programs know how to do the work.
If you had your way, looking ahead to the end of session, what would be a really successful raft of legislation dealing with fraud? Like, what would be a great success for you to get through this year?
Oh, great question. So I would love to see the independent OIG that is running in Representative Vice Chair Anderson's bill. It houses it within the office, sort of parallel to the Office of Legislative Auditor, and I think that reporting to the legislator is really important. As you know, I've said many times about the separation of powers. We have OIGs within different agencies already, but I think we need something separate and independent that has teeth, the ability to enforce outside of the agencies. So I think that would be a huge win. Representative Nash's bill to create fraud fiscal notes, I think would be a huge win. Certainly my whistleblower bill, getting that over the finish line, it passed unanimously in the House, but we need to get that through at the end of session to provide more protections for state employees. That's really important. I do agree with some of the efforts in the governor's bill about creating a kickback crime and a public theft crime. But I have to say, as was testified to in that report in the hearing today, they already have the authority to do a lot of these things. So in some ways, creating these crimes might help, I hope it does, but I don't want the public to be misled. They can already stop payment for credible allegations of fraud. That's in the statute, in multiple places. So they are just not taking the action. So maybe strengthening statute by, adding these new crimes will help. I hope it does. But what we really need is to make sure that the agency heads and the agency employees who have the authority to act are using that authority. And to Representative Rarick's point, I mean, the penalties are low compared to federal penalties for similar crimes. So that's something we can maybe work on in the future.
Do you think part of the culture shift that you're advocating for should include less privatization of government services? It seems like that is where a lot of the problem is in terms of contracting or granting with nonprofits or organizations. Should the part of the culture shift, Center of American Experiment fellow Bill Glahn also said that that should be something that the legislature should consider. Do you agree with that?
I'm mixed about it. So on the one hand, some of the fraud has been seen in nonprofits, for sure. Some of it is in private businesses, LLCs that run autism centers and sober homes and things like that. And the question is, who can best provide services that help meet Minnesotans' needs for vulnerable people? And in some cases, I think nonprofits, faith-based groups, businesses really do provide excellent services. And what we've seen is that the fraud is really tied to, a particular business model. So it's not, we have thousands of nonprofits, thousands of private entities that provide government services and do a fantastic job. What we're seeing in these very egregious examples is a business model where they are preying on vulnerable people to sign them up for services that they either don't provide or provide at a substandard level, and then bill fraudulently, double bill. In some cases, we saw triple billing, right? And they layer on other services. So if they're providing autism services, then they become a Feeding Our Future site. Then they also provide non-emergency medical transportation. Then they provide language translation. So it's identifying that nexus of a business model of fraud that I think is really important to do. And sometimes that will be private sector businesses, sometimes it will be nonprofits. But I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, because a lot of the transforming services that happen are relationship driven. And those things, I think, are really the fabric of our communities where the work of helping vulnerable people matters. So I wouldn't want to say absolutely only state agencies or government employees are the ones best suited to provide these services.
Can I add to that?
Yes, please.
So the only thing I would add to that is that one thing that nobody looks at, apparently, the legislature just began looking at it, is when you are a nonprofit and you're receiving government grants, government funds, what are you paying your top people? I have looked at more 990s in the last few years than in quite a long time. And the thing that I'm finding as a pattern is that the top people are making $450 and above. I saw one that was $721,000. And they pay their top, in those same instances, they pay their top 10 people over the governor's salary. So right now the governor he can make about $150,000. He's kind of rejected that, and he's only taking $127,000. But nonetheless, there are multiple. So we have 2,500 nonprofit organizations in Minnesota that get government grants. And I think that one thing that we should do here at the legislature is cap the salaries of the top people. Because if you're worried about taxpayer funds, which we are incredibly worried about, then we should also look at that too in the nonprofits. Thanks.
So pass regulation to limit the pay for, how does that work, limiting pay for nonprofits?
It's very simple. So up until the last 2 years, so this had been law for decades, if you were a local government, whether you are county, city, township, whatever, and you wanted to pay any of your employees above the governor, that's the demarcation line, then you had to come to the legislature, get a waiver. That was done in the Subcommittee on Employee Relations, which I've served 10 years on. Now, the last 2 years, the party that was in control decided to gut the authority of the Subcommittee on Employee Relations, and they also removed that cap on all government employees. So what I'm finding now is, as I'm looking at 990s, these top staff are making well above the governor. They're making well above 150,000. And it's not just one or two, it's a dozen or more. So I think that we should revert back to that. If it was good enough for decades and decades and here in Minnesota, in our statutes until just the last 2 years when it was removed for local governments, I think that should be imposed on also nonprofits.
This is a very specific question, but I don't know if you also got them. There's some sort of fraudulent text message that's been going around for Easy Pass or fake Easy Pass. Is that something that you would look at in your committee about what that is or how that's happening?
No, but it did come up in committee today, and Superintendent of the BCA, Drew Evans, is all over it. And he actually also got one of those text messages. He said in committee today. And so when it's dealing with private sector, individual fraud, where it's consumer fraud, that's under the jurisdiction of the BCA. And the Attorney General also has a Consumer Fraud Protection Division, and they work collaboratively. So we haven't spoken about the Attorney General, but the Attorney General is a player in this, and on the consumer side as well as on the particularly Medicaid fraud side. And to the point that Representative Rarick made, I mean, again, the governor's budget in this fraud proposal seems unbalanced. So they give one position for a forensic accountant to the BCA. I think they could use way more than that. The Attorney General's Medicaid fraud control unit, which has been fairly effective, they get, I believe, 9 new positions. DHS, which already has 491 people in the Office of Inspector General, they get another 104 people. And 151 total in the agency, but just in fraud and program integrity, they get 104. So again, this is where the problem existed, and I'm not sure just creating all these new FTEs is the way to solve it. We need to have better IT, which I think is important, but just throwing data analytics on top of the system that doesn't talk to each other is not going to help. We need to make sure that eligibility requirements are being beefed up. And there's a very good proposal where they're going to start working with Department of Revenue to share data based on tax returns to verify financial data to ensure eligibility. I fully support that. Great idea. So there are pieces in it we support, but really what we're talking about is the overall culture and the need for accountability. And I'm not sure this hits the mark, but we'll keep working.
Can I add something? So if you put the right IT in, you should need way less people. You know, that's reality. You should, and I think the IT is really, really important, but it is, as Chair Robbins said, it's much bigger than just adding some AI on top of antiquated systems. But we need to have systems talking to each other. So it came up in the committee, if you have, let's say you have one person, a child, that child, if they're getting CCAP, if they're getting daycare, they should be checked in and out by their parents, okay, on a system that they were actually there for billing purposes, okay? But you should also be able to compare and see, were they in school that day actually? Or were they there? Where were they, right? And is that person, you know, if that person's getting free meals somewhere in the summer program, are they just getting it at one site, or are they having 10 meals a day across 4 towns? You know, one individual name because someone's using their data. So it should be easier if you have good IT, and you shouldn't need all the people to do it, so, thanks.
Do you envision that the new proposals for fraud will be in one big, like, fraud omnibus or per agency bill? Or is it separate bills?
So Chair Pinto, the lead on the fraud committee, presented it as a package today, but actually provisions are moving separately throughout all the different committees. So my guess is that will be embedded in different committee omnibus bills.
That's what he told me today, yeah.
All righty, thanks for your time.
Thanks.